What's up again there, guys? Brian here at 3TR, and welcome to another episode of the People's Questions, where I answer all the questions that you guys have sent me over the past week. This time we got a pretty average episode. Only about maybe, I want to say, 9 questions from all regulars, no newbies, so you know that keeps it relatively conservative. Starting off with the first question coming from All-Star Gamerpunk, and you want to know, since my favorite 2D fighter is Mortal Kombat, what is my favorite 3D fighter? Oh, that's an easy one to call. You also mentioned that I couldn't use any of the 3D Mortal Kombat games, so if we can't use one of those games, I would have to go with the very first Dragon Ball Z Budokai. My favorite Budokai is actually the third one, but that's a 2D fighter. But the first one is a 3-dimensional fighter where you can kind of fight in a 3-dimensional field. There's still a lot of things about that game I think are really cool even now. It's a shame they didn't try to re-release it like on PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, but they did do it with the 360 and the PlayStation 3 if I remember correctly. The next one comes from Santiago Scarpino. You want to know, which was my favorite to least favorite boss fight from Metal Gear Rising? I think my favorite fight was probably the second Sam fight, and I think my least favorite boss fight was, I want to say, that robotic wolf fight. I wasn't really a big fan of that fight, although you can, I think you can fight the wolf as Sam in the DLC, so yeah, that's how I would label it. Your next question comes from the Paper Knight. You want to know, do I think that Judge Magister... Really? The head judge. Do you think ooh, that's interesting one. Do I think he could probably learn Form 7? No, I don't think he would want to. I mean, here's the thing about the Juyo that a lot of people they don't understand why it's kind of a dangerous form. And that's because Juyo really doesn't have a defense. Not only is it difficult to learn, the steps to learning Juyo are this. First, you have to master multiple different fighting forms, because there's not just one form of Juyo. Juyo is a collection of multiple forms from before. It's a collaboration of almost everything that came before it. It's not quite like Nine Man, where it takes elements from forms 1 to 5. It takes different combinations from the first 6 forms, and you use those building blocks to form your version of Juyo. So, for example, Maul's version of Juyo is different from someone like, say, Sidious. And Sidious' version of Juyo would be different than, say, Darth Krayt. And Darth Krayt's version of Juyo would be different than someone like, say, Darth Bane, perhaps. I think he does have some knowledge of Form 7, even though he's not a main practitioner. So that's the second step. The third step is you have to kind of enjoy the fight. And I think the judge is a kind of disciplined fighter. He's not someone that actively goes out to seek fights. He feels like he's doing what he's doing for the right reason, so he has a somewhat noble cause, even though it's misguided. And the fourth one is the mental stress of the form. Because there is such a heavy emphasis on offense, there's very little defense. And so it kind of follows the mentality that the best offense is an overwhelming defense. And if you've actually faced him in Final Fantasy XII, you do see that he does have a significant defensive form. So that alone takes him out of the conversation for him possibly knowing Juyo. But could he do it? It's possible. It's just a really dangerous form. It's kind of like a it's a high-risk, high-reward type of fighting form. Most don't want to do it because of how difficult it is, and it's very difficult to control. I mean, it's Juyo itself. There's a character named Sora Bulk who worked with Mace Windu to help create the completed form of Juyo, which is known as Vapad. But because of his mental instability, he never could actually master the form, and that's why it's so difficult. So do I think that the judge could actually learn it? He could try to learn it, but I just don't think he would really be successful in actually mastering it. There's a lot of different components that make it the hardest form to study, which is why no one at the temple was even really allowed to learn it unless you were given like the highest clearance from Mace Windu and Mace Windu alone. He was the only one who could even allow students to even start learning it. And even the people who were learning the form could not master it on the same level as Mace Windu, which is why he really stands apart from like anybody in the Jedi Order's history. So no, I don't really think the judge could actually get it done. The next question comes from Cassidy Jay Williams, and you want to know, what are my thoughts on Hasbro's decision to continue the recent Power Rangers reboot series with a sequel? Sure. As far as I remember, I don't think the rebooted Power Rangers movie did all that well, but it didn't do bad. I would be more than happy to see a sequel. They certainly left it open. However, there's one component I hope they don't do. Now, I'm not sure if you guys heard this rumor. This rumor came out a little bit after the movie came out, but there was a rumor going around the internet that they wanted to make Tommy a female. Now, I'm going to say this right now. I'm not sexist. I have no issue with them having a female Green Ranger. In fact, the Green Ranger in the first Power Rangers film, the reboot one, was Rita, who was a female and was the Green Ranger. I thought that was an absolutely brilliant decision and it made sense. But when you're talking about Tommy fucking Oliver here, the greatest Power Ranger who's ever lived, the idea of turning him into a female just for the sake of doing it is a dumb idea. If they want to bring in another character and make her the Green Ranger, that's fine. I'm completely cool with the idea. But don't mess with Tommy Oliver. Tommy Oliver is so essential to my childhood. Like, put it like this. Tommy Oliver is one of the two reasons the color green is my favorite color, as you can see here. Because the Green Ranger is my favorite Ranger of all time. And there's another reason why the color green is my favorite, but just leave Tommy Oliver alone. He is a legend for a reason. He is the greatest Power Ranger for a reason. You don't need to turn Tommy into a female to try to make a point. Just bring in another character and make them the Green Ranger. I'm perfectly fine with that. In fact, I had a really cool plot idea of how you could actually bring Tommy in to kind of eventually become the leader, because as you know, the whole debate as for who is the better leader between Jason and Tommy is, you know, that's its own video right there. But yeah, I would be open if they really want to continue it, do so. If they want to bring in Tommy, fine, but don't make Tommy a female. Don't do that. We've seen what happens when people do that, and it's not pretty. I don't want them to do it with Power Rangers. I would be sincerely pissed off. Next question comes from Vergil, the son of Sparta. You want to know, if I could make a Final Fantasy game, what would my premise in the story be in short? I would probably have it be centered around the summonings. Final Fantasy X is by far my favorite, and so there's definitely components about that. I would probably want to take it into my own game, but I would make just a few slight differences to give it its own identity apart from 10. So that's kind of what I would do in short. Next question comes from Alu Sarn. You want to know, do I like how Deadpool breaks the fourth wall? Of course, that's kind of one of the greatest characteristics of that Deadpool that makes him stand out so much. So yeah, that's like if Deadpool didn't do that, then he would just feel very, very weird to me. Next question comes from Demetrius Pfifer, and you want to know, if I was able to continue the Versus series into Season 5, do I think that we could ever get a Genesis versus Devil May Cry 1 Dante? It's possible, but again, it all depends on the performance of the season, and so far, the performance is seriously lacking, which just kind of gives me the impression that, you know, not many people want this series to continue. More people are really watching. Like, trust me, I am keeping track of the performances of all these videos at any one time, and I'm telling you, a lot more people are watching seasons 1 to 3 than they are watching this current season. So that kind of just tells me that maybe people are just getting tired of these videos, or they're getting a little bit stale, and I just don't really know how to improve them. Now, some people have thrown in a couple of ideas, but that just adds a whole new dimension into how difficult these videos would be to make. And if I started doing these elements, then I could not do them every month. It would take maybe 2 to 3 months to do these type of videos, and I don't want to end up falling into that department. I kind of like to do things on a set schedule, and just adding those elements would just make the videos harder than they already are. Next question comes from Silver Lionheart 2099. You want to know, Here's your question. Even though you might decline your versus series are due to limitations of characters used. Okay, so we're kind of talking, this kind of goes into the last question. Basically, you're asking that, have I ever thought that the decline of my versus series is due to the limitations of characters I use and your absolute refusal to use some characters even from franchises that you've used? I don't think it's a decline. I don't think it is. There's just like, what do you mean by absolute refusal? Anybody in the, like, if you're talking about characters in Final Fantasy, everybody is eligible. Anyone could be used in the Versus series outside of Final Fantasy Damnation. No one in that franchise can be used, because that's not a Final Fantasy game. Anyone. The trick is not picking characters, it's finding suitable characters. I'm not gonna put someone like Vincent against someone like Ignis. I don't like mixing combat styles. I don't want someone who uses a sword going up against someone who uses a gun. That's just unbalanced. I don't want someone who uses a sword going up against someone with a spear. And so some of the challenges with these matchups is not so much finding an opponent, it's finding a suitable opponent that has some similarities to them, but has enough differences that it can be comparable. Like, I would be more than ecstatic to use someone like Sabin in a matchup, but with him being a martial artist, there's only like there's only 2 characters and then in all the Final Fantasies that fit in that category, and that would be Tifa or Zell. And I know damn well Tifa and Zell can't stand up to Sabin, so using Sabin in a matchup just makes no sense. So, no, I don't think that's what it is. And there may be limitations, but those are limitations that I place on myself in order to make the matchups easier for me to pull off. I have recently stepped out of my comfort zone and did a character that I knew nothing about in my Steiner versus Gladios matchup. Trust me, before that video ever came out, I knew nothing about Steiner. I had never even played Final Fantasy IX, so that was the first time I went into a matchup completely blind, and that video, while didn't do bad, it just didn't quite have the results I was expecting, despite the fact that I felt I did a pretty good job. I mean, heck, even playing 9, I was introduced to a whole levy of characters that I would love to use in a Versus series, that I, still might if, the performance of this season improved, and we went to a season 5. There's a bunch of characters in there I want to use. But no, I think it's, I just think that it's just, maybe people are just not all that interested in these matchups anymore, and, they want me to improve it, but I just don't know how. Because I'm seeing a decline in the other Versus series that I particularly watch. I'm seeing their performances seriously decline. So maybe it's a universal thing, I don't know. And the last question of the episode comes from the Batman of Neo Gotham. And you want to know, knowing how you feel about a fight between Ezio and Edward, do I think that Connor will be able to beat Ezio from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood? You see, the thing is, that's Ezio at his prime. And so, at that point, he'd be very familiar with firearms, but Connor doesn't really use, I mean, he has a firearm, he just doesn't really use it. So it would come down to combat. I think maybe it's possible Ezio. It comes down to the combat, and we're talking about, like, I'm assuming we're using Connor at his best, so they have an equal, I mean, maybe not, well, they have like a close to equal amount of combat experience. That's a really tough one. That would actually make for a pretty good matchup. If I were to put, but I still think that if Edward took on, say, Ezio from Brotherhood, I still think that Edward would win, but it would be a much closer match, because by that point Ezio's had plenty of experience against firearms. I just don't think he's encountered someone who's as skilled as that. But that's actually a good one. I don't really know who would win that one. It would come down to combat, to who's the better up close fighter, and I think that that is a really tough one. I actually don't know. That would make for a good matchup one day if I ever do a season 5. But yeah, that's actually a good one. And with that, those are all the questions that were sent to me this week. I'd like to thank all of you guys for sending in your questions. If you guys have any more questions you'd like me to answer in next week's episode, be sure to type them in the comments down below. But make sure you get them into me before next Wednesday, preferably before noon, to start filming the next episode. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.